Well, hello and welcome back. In this episode, I'm wiring two incredibly old Japanese flowering apricots. I'll talk in detail about how to approach wiring older deciduous trees, about some of the mistakes I've made, and how you can avoid them for yourself. This work was performed in May of 2022, as it's the best, if not only time of year that it's safe to wire ume. This is when the branches are the most pliable, sometime after the first flush of growth has extended. The two trees you'll see today are over 70 years old, and we're wiring these for a customer to consider if they're worthwhile candidates for grafting. Stick around as I'll be sharing many tips and ideas that I think you may find valuable. Now let's get started. Here's the first tree. You can see that the branches have been growing straight up for several years. Despite this, there is some new growth forming on the inside, but I want you to take a look at the left shoulder where nothing new is growing. It's going to be my job to wire down all these branches and open up the canopy to allow light into the interior to maintain the growth that is there now and increase its potential for future grafting. I'll start with some tips that I think you might find helpful for wiring deciduous trees. Firstly, aluminum wire is preferable for the majority of deciduous species as it's quite soft, therefore preventing damage to thin bark, and is much easier to bend around fragile branches than copper. Secondly, the pitch angle and distance between wraps should be less than that of copper. Whereas copper on a coniferous tree can be pitched and spaced out significantly without serious consequence, I think that aluminum on deciduous should only be pitched to a maximum of 45 degrees, and spacing should be as consistent as possible, adjusting for elbows or to protect any fragile areas. You'll see what this looks like in the next section. Thirdly, don't be afraid to double up wire, and instead of wrapping in close parallel, fill the space between the previous wire to create a nearly full coverage of the branch with the wire. Although it's not pretty, it could save you from some unnecessary breaks. When wiring deciduous trees, allow the tree to dry out slightly. The reduction of water flow through the tissues will reduce the turgidity and stiffness of the branches. This is particularly effective for ume. By doing so, I've noticed a significant change in the flexibility when bending. That was a tip from my oyakata, and it could mean the difference between breaking and bending a branch on many occasions. Anyway, here's the final result. I made two mistakes bending on the left and right side here. Pretty embarrassing, but I think it's good to learn from. I was pretty sure the one on the left side was broken right away, which is unfortunate, because now we have to keep the long, awkward branch behind it in order to have a thin and clean area to graft into. On to the next break on the right side. I'm lucky there's interior growth here because you can see the branch on the right has withered. These old branches crack often as you bend them. It can be difficult to discern at which point the lifeline has actually been separated, and all you're left with is disappointment, which is unfortunate because I really like this tree. Next time, I'll certainly be protecting these areas more diligently. Before we get to the next tree, I'll show you a branch it donated to me. You can see some of the wire up close, and I'll break down some of the bending technique. When I bend these, I'm focusing on the straight sections that have grown without any cuts, cracks, or deformities that would otherwise compromise the structural integrity. I know that these are the safest locations to bend. Everywhere else, I have to operate with extreme caution. Working down the branch, I'm holding every point that I'm bending closely together with both hands, applying constant pressure from both sides. This branch has been off the tree for a little while. You can see the leaves are still upright, but it is much more flexible than a branch on the tree with water flowing through it. Notice the size of the wire, how I apply pressure to the branch instead of just forcing my way through the bend. Only making incremental adjustments to each bend and repeating back over them only if I feel comfortable. Once the branches have been brought down, I want to bring the tips back up, pointing the leaves slightly upwards towards the sky. Repeat this on all the branches, fanning them out as you go, and you've successfully wired your tree. The result of doing this looks kind of strange at first, but when it's time for the wire to come off, the branches will raise up softly, and the tree will look very natural. I think you get the point. Let's go on to the next tree. This next one's almost as wide as the workshop, and I have to crank down all these branches with a combination of guy wires and raffia. But before I get to that, take a quick look at this branch. This is what happens when the tree decides to only grow flower buds. Because there's no leaf buds, this branch is now useless and will wither through the summer. It isn't surefire, but this can be mitigated through the previous year's spring pruning to prevent the branch from elongating too far. There's a breakdown of that technique on a previous video of mine. I'll leave a link in the description and tag it at the end of this one. Here's where that previous example branch was from. It was far too long, so it was removed. It could be debated whether or not this work is actually necessary, as the risk may not be worth the reward to many people. And contrary to the order I was instructed, perhaps grafting in new branches, letting the tree adapt, and wiring the new growth would be a good path as well. But that's neither here or there. I'm subject to the whims of my oekata, and if he feels this is necessary to appeal to his clients, then I have to trust his judgments as he trusts me with these trees. I'm just grateful to hone my technique and train my hands working with such old material. And I hope the lessons I've learned are as valuable to you as they are to me. It should go without saying that full wiring like this is best performed on trees in appropriate health. If you have any worries that your tree is in poor condition, hold off until it recovers. Ensure that you're familiar with your trees and their growth behavior in your climate zone before making any leaps changing the design. You can see I'm now wrapping almost every branch into the apex with raffia. These will have to be bent far down to fill in space where other branches have withered over time. Given how old these branches are, without the wrapping, they'd surely snap. I'm also using many guy wires to guide them down into their final positions. Which I hope, if and when this tree is grafted, the new structure provides interesting locations to regrow from. Here's the final result. When you look at a deciduous tree after it's been wired, it still has the leaves on, it doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense. You can see the general shape and silhouette, but you can't appreciate your efforts until the leaves come off and fall. I'm glad with the way it turned out. Even if this tree isn't grafted right away, I think this design is sustainable for a few more years. If you want to see these and other great ume flowering, come visit the garden in February. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or suggestions, throw a comment down below. If you learned something new, give it a like or share, and I'll catch you on the next one.